Hey everyone, Sylvie here. I am going to be teaching you 3 ways today to finish off footage chain. So when you buy footage chain from Halstead, it doesn't come with a jump ring attached, it doesn't come with a clasp or anything like that. And it's great because it means you can cut it to the exact length you want, but also it means that you need to do a little bit of extra work so that you can turn it into finished jewelry. So I'm going to show you 3 ways, and the first way is going to be soldering a jump ring through a chain link. The second way is going to be soldering a jump ring to the end of the chain, and the third way will be using an end cap. So the first way that I want to start by showing you is often the easiest, and it's one that you're going to use all the time because it's quick and simple. And that would be soldering a jump ring closed through the last link of your chain. So the main thing that you want to pay attention to when using this method is that, first of all, your jump ring is going to fit through the chain link. And on our website, every chain includes the inner diameter size of the links, so you can match that measurement up with the thickness of your jump ring, and you'll know that they'll be a perfect match. So I'm going to be making a bracelet today. I've got a 7-inch piece of 2460. It's a Rollo chain, and I'm going to be using jump ring SJ845. So I've got my jump ring here, and I'm just going to use my flat nose and chain nose pliers to open it up. And I'm just going to put that right through the last link of my chain. And I'm going to close it up nice and tight by brushing those ends past each other. All right. And so now that I have my jump ring in my chain, the best way to do this soldering is by using a third arm and a pair of cross-locking tweezers. So the cross-locking tweezers means that when I open it and close it, it's doing all the work of holding the jump ring for me. I don't actually have to hold it, which is great when you're doing little minute soldering and things like that, because I've got the torch in one hand and a soldering pick in the other. So this is perfect. And what I'm going to do is clamp my jump ring in my third arm, and I've got my chain hanging down and the pliers come across above the chain. And so what this does is it keeps my tiny little chain out of the way from my flame so that I'm not at risk of melting it. And my tweezers also act as a heat sink. And what that means is they take the brunt of the heat from my flame, also further protecting my chain. So I've put my jump ring in, and I've made sure that my seam is right at the top because I want to make it as easily accessible for myself. And I'm going to take my flux and add just a tiny little bit to the top right there. And what I need elsewise for soldering is a solder pick, because I'm going to pick solder and place my solder right on top there. And I also need some solder, and I'm going to be using easy solder. So this is the lowest melting temperature solder, and it's perfect because this is often the last step that you're doing, and you want a low temp solder to have the least amount of heat on the piece so that you're not at risk of melting the chain. So I'm going to just dump a couple pieces out. I always like to have way more solder than I need because you never know when that one piece is going to jump and run away from you. So it's always better to have more and be prepared. And I also have a super fine pair of tweezers. I don't really need them in this one, but they're super great when soldering with tiny things, and we'll definitely want them later. Now I'm pretty much ready to solder. I've got my solder, I'm set up, and my piece is fluxed. And the first thing I'm going to do is make sure that I have a small tip on my torch. You want the smallest tip possible, essentially, that you can get away with. The smaller the flame, the less likely you are to melt things. So we're going to light this baby up, and I'm going to use a small flame because it's a small piece. The thicker the jump ring, you're going to go up a little bit. The smaller the jump ring, you're going to go down a little bit. So it's all relative to what you're soldering. I'm going to come in here and pick up my solder. I want it on my pick, ready to go, so that when my piece is hot, it's just going to go. And I'm gently heating the jump ring, the top half only. And I'm going to touch my solder on with my pick and gently heat it, and it went really fast. You saw that. So I'm going to quench that, and I'll pickle it and show you when I'm done. And basically what you're going to see is that the jump ring has soldered closed, but my chain has not soldered to the jump ring. And I'll see you in a minute. Okay, so I've pulled that out of the pickle. It's nice and clean. And what you can see here is I've got a free moving jump ring on my chain. It's soldered closed. So this is great as an end jump ring that you would clasp into, or this method is a great opportunity to also connect personalized quality tags. So it's a great time to link in an oval jump ring that has 925 on it, as well as your maker's mark or something like that. Perfect opportunity to mix in some extra little charms or things like that to spice up a chain. And you can connect a clasp the same way. You can add it through an additional jump ring or whatnot. So that's method one. And the main thing with any of these methods is less is more when it comes to the solder. The more solder you use, the more likely you are to solder your links to each other, which is obviously not ideal. So you really want to use only what you need. And because everything that we're using is so small, that's going to be a very small amount. Now for the next method that we're going to do is we're going to solder jump ring to the end of a chain. So this is often used when the chain is too small to fit a jump ring through, or you don't like the look of it, or you want to link a smaller jump ring to a clasp or a larger jump ring. Something like that is when you might want to solder the jump ring directly to the end of the chain. So the chain that I'm going to be using today is 21020DD. And this is a very tiny drawn cable chain. And I'm just going to be turning it into a simple necklace. So I want to solder a tiny jump ring to the end. So what I'm doing is I'm just gently, first I'm going to flex my chain before I lay it out because I don't want to mess up what I've spent time laying out. All I need to do is flex just the end of it. And I'm just going to drag my chain across my board so that it's nice and straight. All right. And I'm also going to be using SJ63 as my jump ring. And it's a super tiny jump ring because I've got a super tiny chain. So I want to keep them nice and proportionate to each other. And the first thing that I'm going to be doing is closing that jump ring up with my pliers. If you wanted to, you could buy a jump ring that is already closed. But I had these on hand, so I'm going to be using an open jump ring. And I'm going to place that right up next to my chain. And there are kind of two ways that you can do this. You can put the open part of your jump ring right at your chain, and therefore when you solder the chain to the jump ring, you're also soldering the jump ring closed, so you're killing two birds with one stone if you don't want an open jump ring. If you're looking to link that jump ring to something else, say a lobster clasp or a spring ring, you can flip it around and have the open seam away from the chain so that you can still open it up, link on whatever you need to link, and then you would use the method that we just learned of using our third arm to solder that jump ring shut. So my chain is fluxed, and I'm going to flux my little jump ring here. And it's with this one that my tiny tweezers really come in handy, because everything that I'm working with is so small that if I tried to nudge things over with my fingers, it would just mess everything up. So I've got my nice little tweezers so that I can do all of the nudging with those. All right, so I've placed my jump ring right next to my chain. They're touching. That's really important. You want to make sure that they're touching, otherwise your solder isn't going to link them together. And there are two ways that you can do this. You can take a slightly larger piece of chip solder and place it right underneath so that when you gently heat it up, the solder will rise up to the jump ring and the chain connecting them. Or you can come in with your pick and just gently hold it right at the top and have it flow that way. That's the method I'm going to use because I like having the flexibility of being able to move. Sometimes when there's still moisture in your flux and things bubble, things move a little bit, so this just gives me a little bit more control. And with this method especially, you really want to make sure that you're using a very little amount of solder and a really tiny flame, since there is no heat sink protecting your chain. So I've got my solder pick, my solder's over here. I'm still using easy solder because of the low melting temperature, and I'm gonna get my torch lit up. And now I'm gonna make this a really tiny flame because I'm working even smaller than I was before. Come over here, grab my tiny piece of solder, and I'm going to gently heat, and I'm going to hold my piece of solder right over that joint, and when I come in with the flame, I don't need to place the solder. I'm going to hold them all at once, and the heat will just draw that solder right down, and then I can pull my pick away. So let's do that. Oops, my solder fell off my pick, and that's why I always have extra solder so that when one falls off, I've got another waiting. All right, so I saw my solder drop. I'm just gonna make sure it's on my chain. And that's it. Everything with chain and soldering finishing happens super fast because everything is super tiny. So I'm gonna pop this guy off. I'll quench it, pickle it, and I'll show it to you when it's all finished. All right, so I've pulled that out of the pickle and I've got it here on my block so that you can see it nice and up close. And you can see that my jump ring is soldered right to my chain where my seam was. And now if I wanted to finish off this chain, I would do the exact same thing to the other side. And then I can turn it into whatever I want. I can add a clasp, quality tag, a larger jump ring, whatever I may need. And then the third method is using an end cap. And end caps are these little guys right here. You can see them. We sell them as S2715. And they're these little U-shaped pieces that clamp over the end of your chain, therefore creating an opening so that you can link a jump ring through or your clasp, whatever it may be. And ours are really nice because they already have a 925 marking on them, so they're already quality stamped, which is excellent. So this method is really great for chains where you can't fit a jump ring through the end. So that either means it's too tiny, or it might be something like a rope chain or a wheat chain, something that's woven where you don't really have an open link at the end. And that's what I'm going to be using today. I'm using a tiny double rope chain. 210R is the chain that I'm going to be using today. And the first thing that I'm going to do actually is I'm going to take my end cap and I'm going to open it up. And these are soft, and all I need is my fingers to open this guy up. And why I'm doing that is so that I can get in there and pre-flow some solder. So I just want to open it up enough just so that it will sit flat on my solder block. And I'm going to also flux both ends of the inside of that. And you can tell the inside from how you open it, but also the side that is not quality stamped. So you want to make sure that you don't flow any solder there. So I've got my end cap opened up with both of the wide ends out and fluxed. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pre-flow some easy solder on there, and then I'm going to clamp it around my chain, add a little bit of heat, and the solder that's already there will reflow, thus attaching my end cap to my chain. So this is a great method for pre-placing solder. So I'm going to take my solder chips and place one on either end of that end cap. Okay, I've got a chip of solder on either end of that end cap. That can be a little bit of a finicky process. Things like to stick. And I'm gonna have my pick just in case I need it, but I'm gonna get my torch going. Have a small flame because this is a super small piece, same MO as everything else, and I'm just going to gently heat it until I see that solder flow. 1, 2. I'm going to quench this guy, and now because I was in and out so quickly, I don't need to pickle this before I'm ready to solder it to my chain. So the first thing I'm going to do is partially get this guy closed up. And I'm still using my fingers because it's nice and soft. And in the process of pre-flowing that solder, I've also annealed the piece so that it's nice and easy to bend around. And so I'm closing it up to a fairly tight opening. I kind of want it to be as close as I can to the size of my chain right now, so I don't have a ton of wiggle room when I'm going to attach it. I'm going to lay my chain out. First I'm going to flux my chain because that needs to be fluxed. And just the very end where we want that solder to flow. If you flux too much outside of that very, very end, what you're doing is creating an environment that is conducive to solder flowing. So you're keeping it clean, and that's going to make it easier to have that solder flow down the links. So you really only want to flux just what you need. And I'm also going to give my end cap just a gentle flux, and I'm gonna come in here and put it right around the edge of my chain. So I've got my end cap and my chain is sitting here and it's set up on my board like this. So I'm looking straight over the U. And I'm gonna take a pair of chain nose pliers and I'm just gonna squeeze down right on the two ends of my end cap. And what that's gonna do is it's going to pinch my chain right in the middle. All right, so that is all set up. I'm visually looking at it and I can see that my chain is touching both sides of that end cap. And now what I'm gonna do light my torch up, and I'm gently going to come in here and just add a little bit of heat right to that spot. It's going to reflow the solder that I had put on the inside of the end caps and attach it to the chain. So again, we want a nice tiny flame. I have my pick just in case I need to move anything around. I'm just going to gently heat that. And there it goes. So I'll quench this, show it to you, and then we'll recap at the end. All right, I've pulled that guy out of the pickle and I've got it right here for you to see. It's attached. It's all on the end there, and my solder hasn't really flown down the length of the chain, which is exactly what we want. And so now I can take this and I can link a jump ring through it, a clasp, charm, whatever. So those are 3 really great ways to finish off footage chain. It's a variety of ways that you can mix and match to suit your needs and the visual look that you like. The end caps are a really great option because they can make your chain have that little extra edge of professional finish. Oftentimes when you purchase a pre-finished chain, it may have those on it, so it's a nice way to add them yourself if that's a look that you're going for. But all of these ways, the main thing to remember is a small amount of heat and a small amount of solder. And just remembering those 2 things are going to be your best friend when finishing off any end chain. So you'll be less at risk of melting your chain and flowing solder down the length of the chain and soldering your links together. So that's 3 ways to finish that chain off, and you'll be able to see all the products I've used in this video. And if you have any questions, you can feel free to reach out to me at studio@halsteadb.com, and please connect with us on Facebook and Instagram at Halstead Jewelry Supplies so that you can share your tips and tricks for chain end finishing and all of the projects that you're working on. Until next time. Hey everyone. Okay, just a couple questions that came up. A couple people were asking about what kind of solder I use and if I pre-ball it up, as well as about extra easy solder. So extra easy solder melts at an even lower temperature than easy solder, and it can be great for things like this. The main thing I would say is it has the most difference in color from sterling silver because it has the least sterling content in it. It has a more yellowy color, so you're not going to get as good of a match in color with extra easy solder. So that's my one tip about that. I use a combination of pre-cut solder chips like Pallions, as well as sheet and wire solder. If it's sheet or wire, I do tend to like to roll it through the rolling mill to thin it out, or you can hammer it. And that will make it thinner and give you a little bit more control. I tend to use wire solder for larger pieces that I'm working on. The Pallions are great for these super tiny things because they're already cut super tiny. Let's see, we had a question about soldering jump rings and whether or not that's good for if your chain gets caught on anything and having a release. That is kind of really personal preference. I have heard it both ways. I do personally like to solder all of my jump rings for security, so that things don't pull and get lost. But like I said, that is personal preference, and I wouldn't say necessarily that one is better than the other. So that's that. We had a couple questions about torches and things like that. I was using an acetylene torch that brought air in from the environment, so there is no oxygen tank. You can use oxyacetylene, oxypropane, either one. They both work great for this. You have a lot of control over flames when you use a gas and oxygen mix, but that is personal preference of which fuel type you prefer. You can use the handheld butane torches. However, you have less control over flame size, and so it can be a little bit more difficult to solder super fine things with those torches just because you don't have as much control. But you know, people definitely can do it, and it all comes down to torch control and practice. Yes, you can add clasps in the same way by linking jump rings to the end of your chain. Once you link it in, you can link a clasp as well. And would you want to keep it out of the pickle? I tend to do quick dips in the pickle with if there's a clasp on the end, because there is a steel spring in any of your lobster or jump ring, or I'm sorry, lobster or spring ring clasps. There is steel in there, so it can contaminate your pickle. But if you dip it really quick, it tends not to. Someone mentioned that they hang the clasp just over the top of their pickle with a third arm. So the jump ring is included in the pickle, but the clasp is not. So that's also a method that you can use to keep that out. So we've got just a couple minutes left. Someone had inquired about solder-filled jump rings or Argentium jump rings. I have never used solder-filled jump rings. A couple people have mentioned that they haven't worked out well for them. So that I would say is trial and error for you. I haven't worked with Argentium much either, but I do know that it does fuse very well. So you can definitely give it a go. Deb here is asking about different types of clasps for people with dexterity issues. I would definitely say larger clasps and lobster clasps are better. They're a little bit easier to use than spring rings, as well as magnetic clasps are really great for people with dexterity issues as well, because they don't have to pull on a trigger. They can just pull them apart. Let's see what we've got here. Someone mentioned making a hook with wire to hang their pieces over and out of the pickle so that it doesn't contaminate. That's a great suggestion. Hillary just posted a link to lobster clasps. The larger the clasp too, also a little bit easier it is for people to use. And yes, as Hillary mentioned, keep your heat away from the magnets because it will demagnetize them. And that's the same thing if you're soldering on a clasp. You want to make sure that your torch control is really pinpointed to the jump ring and not to the not to the clasp, because that heat can cause that spring to despringify if you get the clasp too hot. So just be mindful of that. Let's see. There's a bunch of different types of pickle. I'm using Sparex is the pickle that I'm using. You can also use a white vinegar mix. There's all different kinds. It's just finding which one you like best, to be honest with you. And I do think that is all the time we have right now, unfortunately, but if you have any more questions, feel free to put them in the lobby chat, and I will get to them over there. I'll be hanging out in the lobby for the rest of today as well as tomorrow. So feel free to put any additional questions you have in there and I will answer them. Thanks for joining. We have a session next up with Alyssa about influencer advertising. So you definitely don't want to miss that because social media is kind of important right now. So I'll see you next time. Thanks for joining.